The audience is so fragmented now, and there's such a battle for ratings, and with so many cable outlets, it's hard to imagine that they're not somehow affected by the money they need to bring in. It's, I think, high time that we had a source for news like the Real News Network where you can just count on it not being influenced, because there's no way that it can be.
Welcome to the next segment of our interview with Sabah al-Nasseri, a professor of political science at York University in Toronto, an expert on Middle East politics, and we're discussing the end of the UN mandate for American troops in Iraq and what will happen next. Welcome, Sabah.
My pleasure.
So just to sum up from the last segment, the UN mandate is about to expire at the end of this year. You were saying in the last segment that it's likely that the Iraqi government will request a year extension of this mandate. Yeah. So essentially, sort of status quo. The SOFA agreement, which allows it's the agreement that creates the terms between the Iraqi government and the U.S. for how American forces operate in Iraq, is stalled, although there's been some American concessions. But it seems like the Iraqi parliament and many Iraqi political and military forces have their own view on what should be happening next in Iraq. So first of all, talk about a little bit the broader context. This must not have been in anybody's imagination in the White House in 2003 that they would be dealing with an Iraq that is saying no to them.
Not only the U.S., but the current Iraqi government actually did not imagine last year that there would be a huge resistance within Iraq, outside the parliament, but also within the cabinet against the agreement. Because in November 2007, when the al-Maliki government, and not only the al-Maliki, but a lot of members of his cabinet signed the so-called Declaration of Principle with President Bush, they were all d'accord with this agreement. They thought they can push for this agreement without actually presenting the agreement to the parliament. They can't do it on the level of the executive.
So this is be careful what you wish for. There was so much talk about democracy, exactly. They kind of got one.
Exactly. That means they kept the whole issue secretly. By the way, in the United States too, they kept it also vis-a-vis the Congress secretly, so that even the member of the Congress, they don't have access to the documents. The same thing in Iraq. Nothing was in public. And in March 7th, when they drafted the first so-called framework of security agreement, the same thing. It was secretly, there was no discussion about it. But the struggles between al-Sadr movement, remember when we discussed this issue in May, between March and May, it was not a coincidence that al-Sadr in May, after the ceasefire, mobilized his people in Baghdad, 10,000 of them, to demonstrate and protest against the security agreement. So at that time, the Iraqi government realized there's a potential for conflict and explosion within the Iraqi societies and within the parliament against the agreement.
So they didn't get their oil law. Yeah. They're having great trouble getting an agreement on SOFA and how the U.S. troops are going to operate there. Exactly. There's provincial elections coming up, yeah, which could dramatically change the whole political picture of Iraq. True. We could see al-Sadr forces winning seats that could make the situation even worse. So in terms of getting an agreement now versus later, it could be even more difficult later. Yeah. So give us do you think this is going to unfold?
Two things. I think that the Iraqi government now, since they realize there's a huge resistance within Iraq, within the parliament, even within the executive against the agreement, they are tactically trying to gain some time to postpone the agreement at least until the new president, Obama, will be inaugurated in January 20th.
And is that what's really the subtext here, is that it kind of doesn't matter what the Americans say, they're not going to have an agreement until Obama takes office?
I think so, and they will not ratify the agreement by this weekend. The Iraqi parliament will not ratify this agreement. They will not sign it. So, as you mentioned before, I think the Iraqi government would ask the Security Council to extend the presence of the multinational troops in Iraq for one more year, and then would wait for the inauguration of President Obama to have a deal with President Obama for two things. First, because they believe they can have a better agreement with Obama when it comes to withdrawal of the troops, redeployment, etc. And the second thing, as you mentioned before, on January 31st, we would have the provincial election in Iraq. And if the Iraqi government can sell it to the Iraqi public that we have a better agreement now, it's about ending the occupation, about ending the war, and not about security with the United States, they could, gain political capital for the election on January 31st.
And perhaps beat back the Sadr forces,
Exactly.
they hope.
At least if they cannot win the election, but at least they can.
Now, where is Sistani on this?
Sistani, as I said, he is the intellectual of this government, actually. But he realized.
Tell us very fast, I'm sure most people know, but very fast for those who don't, who Sistani is.
Sistani is the great Ayatollah of the Shiite religious institution in Iraq, but not only in Iraq, on a worldwide scale. So he is the biggest Ayatollah. And the al-Maliki, al-Dawah party, and al-Hakim, Skiri, are backed up by al-Sistani right from the beginning vis-a-vis al-Sadr movement. But now al-Sistani realized, not only al-Sadr, but most part of the Iraqi people, like 2 weeks ago, you have 100,000 of people in Iraq protesting against the agreement, not only Shiite and Sunni, but Kurds and Christian all over the Iraq.
The agreement with the Americans.
Exactly. So al-Sistani was signalizing to the government, if you don't negotiate a fair agreement in the sense of the interest of the Iraqi population, you will jeopardize your own political position within the parliament. So in the interest of the so-called religious institution and of this current government, you have to have a kind of compromise that articulate the interests of the Iraqi people and their national interests. So he was telling them since July 2008 to have a withdrawal or timetable within this agreement, and anything that could jeopardize the Iraqi sovereignty should not be.
Just in the last couple of days, there's been bombings, there's been more civilian deaths, and this kind of puts itself in the context of what Americans say often, is that if the Americans do pull out, there's going to be chaos, there's going to be civil war, and every time a bomb goes off, this is supposed to be proof that this is what would happen without the American forces. So what do you make of that argument?
I think two things. On the one hand, and this is the problem of the Maliki government, because it's under three kinds of pressure. The first one is domestically within Iraq. The second one is regionally from Iran and Syria. And the third one from the United States. Because remember, Gates, last week, he actually threatened Iraq, if they don't sign this agreement, they will have significant consequences. That means he's saying not only they have possibilities on the financial level, like to block all the Iraqis' assets and Iraqi development funds in New York, but because they created since the last year all these militias and paramilitary groups in Iraq, they can use them against the government to destabilize
now, these are
the Iraqi government.
Mostly Sunni awakening councils.
So-called awakening councils, to destabilize the Maliki government. So the Maliki government has to be very careful here in dealing with the United States.
And do the Americans have the ability to turn these awakening councils as they please? Because we've also heard stories the awakening councils are pretty fed up with the Americans too.
Yes, I mean, this is the problem with the U.S. They create always this kind of Frankensteins, and they cannot control them anymore. So it's possibilities they have there through these militias, paramilitary groups, actually to destabilize the central government.
We'll move on to another segment of our interview. But in the next segment of our interview, let's talk about who's got guns and who are they pointing them at and why.
Okay.
So join us for the next segment of our interview with Sabah al-Nasseri. Endless wars, abuse of powers, declining living standards, and the climate change crisis. The stakes couldn't be greater in the U.S. 2008 presidential elections. And with your help, we're moving our news operation to Washington, D.C., where we'll focus on money and corruption. For example, big oil and arms companies shape American economic and foreign policy with far-reaching effects on the lives of ordinary people. With allies in government, trade unions, the media, and in think tanks, they're a hidden hand that controls the commanding heights of American politics. Taking on the industrial military complex is what real change requires. Even former presidents and high administration officials have said so. But corporate television news treats such positions as marginal. Well, we think it's the decisive issue in the coming presidential elections. Uncompromising journalism requires questioning assumption, interrogating structures of wealth and power. Corporate TV news just won't do it. Only a news organization that's truly independent can tackle such issues with courage and tenacity. And we'll take on corporate TV news live. You'll watch TV news with our panel of writers, journalists, scientists, and historians. You'll be able to join in by phone, webcam, chat. Together, we'll discuss and debate what's the real story and take on the myth and the propaganda. But this is only possible if you support us now. We need to prove that a viewer-funded model works. So if you want the real news, we need you now. please click on the donate button and give generously. Now's the time to decide if you want the real news to thrive.
Your tax-deductible donation makes it possible. Please contribute at therealnews.com.